So at the time when I first started experimenting, or not experimenting, but utilizing amniotic membrane in the office, there were a number of companies in the space, a lot of companies in the space. The rep that I initially spoke to from Ophthalogix was head and shoulders above the other folks that I'd spoken to. He was available, accountable, he was knowledgeable, he took the time to know. This might have been the biggest thing. He took the time to do his research on me and my practice before he came in. He didn't come in and say things like, so do you see much eye irritation? He didn't come in with these questions that people ask sometimes. He came in, he said, look, I know you see this, I know you see that, I know you see a lot of glaucoma. You and I both know the front of the eye is beaten up for a lot of those patients. And then we got kind of right to it. How are you addressing, how are you managing that? And, we began to talk about things like, well, conventional treatment, lubricants, we target the dry eye component of what's happening on the front of the eye. And then other stuff came up like, well, there are all these other forms of keratitis that contribute to what's happening on the front of the eye, that contribute to dry eye, that prevent it from getting better, that keep it running or make it worse, and can have a similar appearance in clinical presentation to dry eye. So the ask was, when you have patients whom you're managing in a way that you feel is appropriate, but you're not getting the right result, the cornea is still showing epithelial compromise, staining, there are visual symptoms, clinical signs, why don't you start thinking about some of these other entities that are running on the front of the eye? Things like neurotrophic keratitis, exposure keratoconjunctivitis, filamentary keratitis, folks who've had a history of herpetic keratitis, a history of an eye injury with the resultant recurrent corneal erosion, folks who've had prior physical or chemical toxic keratitis that sets them up for a mild form of limbal stem cell deficiency as time goes on. And as he went on and on and on, I started to realize there were 20-ish indications on label for amniotic membrane. And there were so many on-label indications because what's happening on the front of the eye is oftentimes multi-mechanistic in terms of the presentation, what's contributing to this presentation, patient signs and patient signs and symptoms. But when we give prescription treatment, oftentimes the indication is narrow. And there are reasons for that, and that's fine. The indication is narrow. The proposed mechanism of action is also narrow. And what's happening on the front of the eye is quite broad and much more open-ended. So if we have one treatment, and people know, clinicians know, if you pile treatment on top of treatment and give them multiple drops to do multiple things, compliance goes down. As compliance goes down, you don't get the right results. Also, when you mix so many different types of meds on the front of the eye, anyone who's even reasonably good at chemistry can imagine you're going to have some side reactions, some unintended products of those reactions that are hard to predict what they'll be and hard to predict what responses they may elicit from the patient, and that can further confound what you're seeing at follow-up. But if we can give one treatment that doesn't do any of that stuff, but does address a lot of what's happening on the front of the eye and takes patient compliance largely out of it or minimizes it, and gets everything turned around pretty quickly, which I found to be a window of about 3 to 7 days, that's a win. It's a win for all sides, and more often than not, I would have patients coming back excited to do the second eye. Even if they didn't need the second eye, they'd sometimes ask for it, and I'd say, we don't need to do that, But the first one felt so good, they wanted to do the second one. And of course, if it was needed, we did it. But if it wasn't, we let them know, you don't need that now. We can always revisit this in the future if you do. But it was very impactful for all sides. So that's how I came to Ophthalogix.